Hi guys, welcome back to a brand new video. If you're new to my channel, my name is Busora. I am a medical doctor living in England, UK. I make videos about medicine and lifestyle. If you've not checked out my channel, please do so now. I'm sure that you'll find a lot of videos there very interesting. And to my OG subscribers, welcome back fam. Today's video is a highly requested one. I am going to be talking to you guys about how I passed the MSRA exams and got a job offer that eventually led to me moving out of the UK and starting GP training here in the UK. So if that is something that you're interested in, then please keep on watching. So first of all, for people who did not know, what is the MSRA? The MSRA is the multi-specialty recruitment assessment test that medical doctors take to enter into residency training in the UK. This is the exam that you have to write if you want to enter into various residency training programs in the UK. For example, GP, psychiatry, radiology, ophthalmology, emergency medicine, anesthesiology, and so on. Even O&G is also there. This is the exam that every single person takes to match into residency in the UK, both IMGs and UK trained medical graduates as well. This exam is a universal exam for every single person to take to match into these residency programs. As you guys all know, I recently wrote this exam and was able to match into GP training in the UK, and you guys have asked me how I studied for this exam, so I'm going to be telling you every single thing I did to study for this exam and everything I think that I would have done differently to get me an even higher score. So the exam is divided into two parts and they each carry 50% of the total score. It is divided into the clinical scenarios and also the SJTs, which are the situational judgment tests, also called professional dilemma questions. So the clinical questions are basically medical questions about how to treat conditions, diseases, whereas the SJTs are basically ethics questions. So they give you questions based off of how to handle pressure, how to relate with patients, colleagues, and so on. So these are not particularly medical questions, but how to handle yourself in a professional medical setting basically. So each of these categories carry 50% of the marks, and you have to get a pass mark in each category to pass the exam or to even be considered at all for a job offer. There are two major rounds available currently for IMGs to write, and that is the first round, which happens in January or February, and the second round, which happens in September. The first round, or the one that happens in January or February, is the major round. There are a lot more slots in those rounds compared to the September round, which is just a fraction of the slots that are available in the first round. And so generally the competition in the first round is not as tough as the second round. Different residency programs have their different criteria for the MSRA exams. For general practice and psychiatry, residency slots are offered strictly based off of your MSRA score. But for other residency programs, the MSRA score only carries a fraction of your overall mark to match into those residency programs, and they also require interviews. For some programs, you will still require to do an interview, which would then carry about 60-50% of your overall score, and some also take into consideration your portfolio. So the amount of researches you've done, teaching and whatnot, it also takes into consideration your portfolio. Now to the materials that I used to study for this exam. There are a bunch of materials available that you can use, and every single one of them is actually good. It depends on what you're comfortable with and what you want from each one of them. But me personally, I use Past Medicine and Samson. Those are the two online platforms that I use to study for this exam. There are other online platforms like eMedica, Medibody, MCQ Bank, Past Test as well. There are so many other platforms available and they are equally as good, but I just decided to stick to these two. And I also would not advise for you to use too many resources, because then you start getting confused and you cannot focus on one. It's better for you to pick two or at most three and hone down on those and study those properly than for you to be jumping helter-skelter reading so many different materials for this exam. That is what I have found works the best. So for me, I started properly reading for this exam in October. Sometime in the middle of October was when I properly started reading for the exam. So I practically prepared for this exam for about 3 months, and I would say that 3 months is ample time to prepare for this exam because it is becoming increasingly competitive. So if you want to get a good enough score, I would say that try and prepare for about 3 months or maybe even more, especially if you're working a full-time job, which I was doing. I was working in the emergency room, and so it was quite a hassle for me studying for this exam and also still keeping my day job and going to work, doing crazy shifts. I had to give out a lot of my shifts and pay for people to do some of my shifts for me because I really wanted to study for this exam. So it will be better if you don't have a stressful job, but if you do, it is still something that you can work around. You just need to prepare more seriously than somebody who is sitting at home 24/7. So basically, I started with past medicine. Past medicine is quite elaborate. It is very elaborate, and it is great to gather knowledge, to read wide and deep. If you want that, then past test is your guy. It has a bunch of questions. The questions are quite long though, I would say that, and they do not really reflect what the actual exam looks like, but it helps you gain a lot of knowledge and it helps you read very wide and know a lot of concepts properly. So that is why I started with past med. And honestly, I started with past med and I was taking notes with past med, which is something I feel really wasted my time. It has a question bank, and it also has this feature where you can search for a specific topic or a specific concept, and there's like a short note there that you can read up on it. So that is a really important feature that I really enjoyed in past med. It also has this kind of textbook aspect grouped into different courses. So there's cardiology, respiratory, surgery, gynecology, whatnot, and so you can just read the textbook aspect without doing the question bank. But I did the question bank and also read the textbook. So this is very great for studying wide, and I think that was what eventually helped me in the long run during this exam, because my exam went really unplanned and I had to use a lot of residual knowledge to answer a lot of the questions, and I feel like most of that knowledge came from me reading so wide. And then I moved on to Samson. Samson is really good with the question bank because the question bank really reflects what the exam looks like. And from what I heard before this exam, there are a lot of questions that come out in the exam that are very similar to the questions in Samson. So it is, or maybe even the same as the question in Samson. So it is a very good way to revise your clinical scenario questions. So for me, my strategy was to read really wide with past medicine and then use Samson to revise and also study the question bank properly. I use Samson a lot for my mocks. I basically did a lot of mocks on Samson and I was targeting really high scores. I was targeting percentages in the 90s for my mocks to help me have a sense of proper preparedness for this exam. Now to the SJTs, or the professional dilemma questions. Mind you, this was my first time writing the MSRA exam. I only attempted the exam once and I got a job offer from the exam. So I did not have a previous experience from writing the exam, which a lot of my mates had. So I didn't really understand when people were saying that the SJTs were more difficult than the clinical questions. I heard a couple of people say that, but it did not register to me. It was when I wrote the exam, when I sat the exam, I really understood what they were saying. And guys, I am going to tell you for free, do not underestimate the SJT aspect. I believe that the SJT is more tricky than the clinical aspect. If you are a doctor who has written professional exams, you would, no matter how bad the clinical scenario questions are, you will still be able to pass it well. But for the SJTs, it's very easy to fail it, and a lot of the questions that you would use to practice before the exam not reflect how crazy, how treacherous those questions will be in the actual exam. So I will tell you for free, and I'm sure that a lot of people keep saying this, please do not underestimate your SJTs. I kind of did that, and that's one of the things I feel like I would have done differently. I underestimated my SJTs a little bit. I left it till a little later in my study before I actually started studying the SJTs. So the materials that I use for the SJTs, first of all, you want to read your Good Medical Practice handbook, the one from GMC. You want to read that handbook at least twice. Just make sure you go through it. It would give you a grasp or an idea of what they are looking for in those questions. Another material that I found really helpful was the Oxford Handbook for SJT. That was such an all-encompassing book. It was such a good book. It divided the SJTs into the 4 main categories, which I will leave here. It gives a lot of different scenarios, answers them, and explains the reason behind each answer. So I would say try as much as possible to read your Oxford Handbook as many times as you possibly can. If you can go over it 4 times, please do that. It is a very good book and you should have digested that handbook properly. Another material that was really useful was the 100 dilemmas question. This question bank consists a list of 100 SJT scenarios and their answers as well. I would also say revise it as many times as you possibly can. It is not enough to go through these resources just once. You want to go through it multiple times. A lot of people that I know that I actually asked before I wrote this exam told me that they went over their SJTs multiple times. And one thing that I have realized is that IMGs tend to have a big problem with the professional dilemmas or the SJT aspects, and that's because it's a different climb we are going into, especially for Nigerian doctors. A lot of the time we are very straightforward in the way that we talk, in the way that we interact. We are very straightforward people. If you are answering the questions based off of what you would do in a Nigerian setting or as a Nigerian doctor practicing in Nigeria, you're definitely going to have problems passing that aspect. So that is one thing that I would say. When you're answering this question, do not answer it as, oh, this is what I would do. No. And that is one thing that I found really helpful. Answer it asking yourself, what would a UK doctor do? What would somebody who is a UK doctor, according to the good medical practices of the GMC, what would that doctor do? And answer those questions based off of that. Okay, so that is one thing that I would say that you should put in mind, and study, practice. It is not enough to read those resources for SJT once. You have to read it multiple times to the point where your brain is recalibrated and you start thinking like that kind of doctor, and you start thinking in a culturally changed way, and that is the way that you can really pass your SJTs properly. So now to the exam itself. So for the clinical problem solving aspect, there are 97 questions that you need to answer within 75 minutes, and then for the SJTs there are 50 questions that you need to answer within 95 minutes. So in total the exam is 170 minutes. You have, I think, about 5 minutes in between each aspect. So in between the clinical scenario and the SJTs, you have a 5 minute break that goes by really fast. So now on the exam day, the things that I would advise that you do is try as much as possible to book an early time in the day. If you know that you are more of a morning person, which I think a lot of people are, I believe that it is better to write an exam in the morning than to write it later in the day. For me, my exam time was actually the last slots. I think it was, I started my exam around 4:30 p.m. thereabout, and so I was already really exhausted in the day. I was tired, already had coffee, I was so exhausted, and my brain was already like winding down when I wrote that exam, which I would definitely not advise. Secondly, go in there confidently, have a clear mind when you're answering your questions, and answer your questions accurately. Thirdly, there is a feature for you to flag questions. So questions that you are not so sure of, you can flag them so that you can go over those questions again without having to start from the beginning. This exam is a computer-based exam, so you can easily just mark the questions that you are not really sure of and then go over those questions at the end of your exam. My advice would be to not flag too many questions. Don't flag too many questions because you will not be able to go over every single one of them. Like I said, the time is already not enough. I was barely able to go over any flagged questions at all. When you have 50 questions and you flagged 40 of them, try and answer the questions to the best of your ability for the first time, and for the exceptional questions that you feel like we really need to come back to, then you can flag those and then go back to them. Now to my observation about the exam. First of all, the exam was harder than I anticipated. After preparing for the exam, studying and all of that, I was expecting it to just be, you know, the normal exam that I'm used to. I've written a lot of professional exams in my day, and I was actually surprised at the level of difficulty that this exam, especially because of the score I was targeting. I was targeting a 520 and above, and I ended up not getting as high as that, but I still got enough to get me an offer. And secondly, like I already said, I found the SJTs way more challenging than I expected. My third observation was something that I actually wasn't expecting. Again, before I write any exam, I ask a lot of people who had written the exam about the exam, so I know what to expect. And a lot of people gave me the impression that if I practiced enough question banks, especially the Samson question bank, that I would be good to go for the clinical aspect. And it was quite a shocker for me when I entered into that exam and I did not see any question that was familiar. Like, I didn't even see similar questions at all. My questions were very, very new, and again, there were other people that I know that got very similar questions. One thing that you need to note is that each candidate is going to get different questions. So me and the person sitting next to me, we are not going to get the same questions. In fact, we may get extremely different questions. And that was one thing that I found out from the exam. So try as much as possible not to bank on any question bank. That was not the case for my time. They actually rolled out extremely new questions, brand new questions that I then had to use like a lot of internal residual knowledge to answer. And that's not the case for every single person, and that is why the exam is not particularly fair for all. Okay, it just depends on your luck. Last thing that I would have done differently is that I would have gotten a study buddy. Okay, for this exam, this is one of the very, very few exams that I feel like for the most part I studied alone by myself. I actually did not really study with anybody. I didn't really have a study buddy. I was a little bit isolated when studying for this exam, which is something that I feel like I would have done differently if I were to do it again. I was aware of this. I actually know that I study better when I have somebody else also studying with me and motivating me to do more. But for some reason, for this exam, I was quite isolated and I basically studied by myself. Looking back, I would have at least dragged one person with me and we would have studied together and pushed ourselves better, because I feel like that would have been better for motivation and for covering more ground. Personally, I'm not a big fan of online large study groups. I don't think that they are very helpful, so I still wouldn't have done that, but at least I would have gotten one or two people with me to study with me, and I feel like that would have made a world of a difference as well. So yes guys, those are the things that I feel like I would have done differently, and I hope that you actually take all of the things that I've said into consideration and actually do them differently as well, so that you will not be looking back and be low-key regretting like me. Thankfully, everything worked out in the end and I got a job offer. There is another round coming up this September if I'm not mistaken, and I think that currently you can actually apply to write the exam if I'm not mistaken. If it is not out, it's going to be out soon. Apply as soon as possible. The things that you require basically are you need to have a medical degree first of all, and secondly you need to sign a CREST form. That is the document that you're going to upload when you're applying for this exam. So a CREST form is called the Certificate of Readiness to Enter Specialty Training form basically. So it's called CREST for short. This form basically shows that you have up to the equivalent of foundational year 2 or FY2 competency in the country you are coming from. Any of your consultants can sign that form for you. You just need to download the form and have it signed by any of your consultants. So before you can write the MSRA exams, you have to have gotten at least a foundational year 2 competency. So you have to have been practicing for at least 2 years. So that is the catch for this. If you are still a house officer, meaning that you have been practicing for just 1 year, this will not apply to you and you will not be able to actually sit the exam. Apart from that, you can actually write this exam before passing your PLAB 2 exam, but the catch is that you should have a plan to have written and passed your PLAB 2 exam before work starts. So you have to have gotten your license before work starts. I know somebody who wrote the exam and shortly after wrote the PLAB 2 exam, and their result came out and they got their license before they needed to resume at work. A lot of people were actually asking me if they can do either PLAB or the MSRA. The MSRA is not an alternative to PLAB. The MSRA is not a licensing exam, so you're not going to get a UK license to practice from the MSRA. You can only get the license to practice from after writing PLAB or writing the Royal College exams. If by some chance you write the MSRA exams and God forbid you fail your PLAB exam and you cannot get your license to practice, even if you've been offered a slot, then the job offer is going to be taken from you and given to somebody else. So those are the things that you really need to consider. I hope that this video has been helpful. If you have any extra questions, please leave them in the comment section and I will do well to answer to the best of my abilities. Thank you guys so much for watching. Don't forget to be kind to yourself and be kind to others. I'll see you in my next one. Bye.